welcome back. I'm Ian, and this is part 2 of the room remakeover. I went ahead and painted the first coat on the window trim because I got to get this coat in and cut the wall back in for its first coat to the trim. So what I'm using for this is Benjamin Moore Satin and Pervo. It's an oil-based trim. The thing with oil-based is it gets this really nice deep finish to it. And it has a really nice gloss. It's not too shiny, and this paint holds up real well to chipping and flaking because of the oil base. So that's why I went with it, being that it's going to be a kid's room. So I'm hoping it holds up because I don't want to have to do anything in here for about 10 years. So that's the first coat on that. I'm going to go ahead and get the second coat on that as soon as I'm done recording this. And then the next step is going to be to put in our floor, and this is the flooring we're going with. It is Smart Core from Lowe's, and it's premium waterproof flooring. My wife picked this out. This is what she wanted. And for this box, it was, for the 6 boxes to do the room, it was $300 for the floor, so that wasn't too bad. And then this is the molding we're going to be using. It's a 5 3/4 coat. And then that'll have that bright white paint on it, so it should really pop once it's done. So I'll be back once we make some progress. Okay, I'm here with the floor, and I'm at the door jamb, and I had to cut out underneath door jamb to get the floor to go underneath a little bit, just so when the door jamb comes down, the floor is in underneath there a little bit, so you don't have a gap. But I didn't have to be too perfect because the transition piece I'm putting in is almost as wide as what is here already. So my transition piece is going to be in between the door jamb, so the door sits right on top of the jamb at the bottom that I'm going to put in. So what I do with this masking tape is tape it on here so I can mark where I'm going to have to notch this out so it can slide in that way. And then I'm going to have to rip some off this piece. And then the same with all the first row, just so I can line it up because I don't want to have a small piece that goes underneath here. So that's what I'm going to be working on. This is the hardest step, is getting it in underneath your door jamb and getting the first run of floor in. So that's what I'm working on, and I'll give you a little update once I get a couple rows of this floor in so you can see how it goes. Okay, I got this first piece cut, and you can see how it comes underneath the door jamb. So it'll all be closed up once I put the trim piece in that goes in there from this to the carpet. And then you can see on the other side it goes in underneath like that as well. And then the next step is I gotta rip the next 2 pieces that go against the wall to get rid of that the little groove here that locks in. So I use the tape so I don't have to mark on the finished product. And then I put another run of tape over here so when I'm using the jigsaw, it's not messing up the finish. So just a little tip there. I'm going to go ahead and cut these and start getting some floorboards in place. Okay, so we got the second piece in place now that it's ripped and cut. Now we need the last piece. I have to cut in not half, but you can see where I taped. I flipped it backwards so I could mark it up here so I didn't have to measure it. I'm going to take it down to the, I have my miter saw set up down in the basement, so I'm going to go ahead and go down there and cut that. I put the mark on it, and then the piece here that's fall off will be the starting piece for the second row, because you never want your gaps to line up. It said in the directions anything over 1/3 to 1/2 would be good. So that's about 1/3, I'd say. A little over 1/3, not quite 1/2. So I'm going to go ahead and use that piece over there to start the next row then. So little on how to do that. So I got the front row figured out, and then I went ahead and I just kind of got carried away, and I'm all the way out to here, and then I took a break because it was about 100 degrees in here. So I went and sat in the air conditioning, and now I'm going to finish up the last few rows, but that's what it looks like. The first few rows are your hardest ones to get in. You see I have shims in place. That's so when you're using the tool to hit it together, that it's not all sliding around. So, and once you get past your first rows, it really doesn't slide too much at all, and it makes it a lot easier when you're knocking them in to set it. So that's that, and we'll be back when the floor is done and we're doing some trim work. Okay, we're back in the room, and this is the floor completely in. It's a free floating floor. Okay, I'm here by the radiator. I didn't want to lift the radiator out of place because of the piping. I would have to take that apart. I mean, it has the unions. This should be able to just undo that and undo that. But I really don't want to mess with that. So what I did was went as far underneath as I could. And for this radiator, we're going to make a wooden box that'll get the high gloss trim paint color that we used on the window here. And that's what that paint looks like with 2 coats. You can see how glossy it is, and that's only a satin finish. Okay. So that radiator cover will cover this radiator, that back part of the wall, and that floor. So that'll be nice, and it'll clean up the appearance because it'll look a lot nicer than that boring radiator. Okay, and moving on, we recut the window trim, or the wall back into the window trim. You can see the cut line all the way down along. Now, I painted my walls to cover the spackle, even though I knew I had more work to do and I shouldn't have been coating them. But I didn't want all the dust. Plus, getting one coat on the walls before the floors, less dragging of drop cloths around, and so on. So we went ahead and cut the window back in. But if you were starting with a room that was completely ready, the trim's in here and stuff, you'd come through, do all your prep work, sand the walls, sand the ceiling, sand the trim, and then you would start by painting your ceiling, doing all your trim that's on the wall. So that would be your windows and door trim. So once you did that and you had your finish coats on the trim, you would go ahead and paint your 2 coats on the wall. And then once the wall was done, you would come down, and the last thing you would paint is your baseboard trim. So that is the correct way of doing it. I ended up having to cut back in lines to the ceiling because I wanted to get the wall covered first because of the spackle dust. So I made myself a little bit more work, but it was less messy in here by doing that. So there's a little, or the technique I use and that I was taught to paint a room. And another thing by doing that is if your trim is got the 2 coats of the finish, if you get any type of paint or splash on there, you can just wipe it off. And I'll probably show you guys that when I do some of the trim painting or cut into this door trim, a technique if you mess up. It's really easy to wipe the paint off and start back new. So I'm going to show you that technique later in this video. But that's a quick update, and we'll see you when the baseboard trim and the door trim's in. Okay guys, I'm working on the trim, and as you can see I cut my 45 on this. This is just a scrap piece. I don't put 2 45s together. What I do is miter and coat. So what I'm going to show you is you cut your 45 and you see all this unprimed wood. You're going to go ahead and cut that outline where the primed meets the wood off with a coping saw. And once you do that, this is what the piece will look like. And then the reason for that is once you cut it like that, see how I can push it straight in against that straight piece and you have that nice tight gap? That takes very little caulking to fill in then. So that's what you want to do with this trim when you're doing trim. So you cut the 45, and you take the coping saw, and you cut off the unprimed part, and then sometimes you need to just take some sandpaper and, you know, make it nicer in there so it fits better. But that's just how I do trim work. Alright, and I'll go upstairs and show you what the trim work looks like. Okay, up in the room, and you can see how the joints look when you miter and cope. There's one. Here's another one. And then the last one's over in this corner here. And then we got the trimming along here. And then the door trimming along there, which I had to rip off the end to make it fit. I'm gonna have to take the door off and cut a little off the hinge side and reset the hinges because it's a little out of square. So that'll fix that up. This door's been a problem since we moved in and the whole frame's a little out of whack. So it needs some attention, but it's fixable. That's the update for the trim. So my next step is to caulk and putty all the holes and get this trim ready for paint. So that's the trim work. Okay, back with the trim work, and you can see on the left piece there the holes that are in there from the nails, and on the right you can see right there and right up at the top I puttied in the holes. That's so when you paint it, it looks like it's seamless. You won't see the nails, you won't see any of the gaps, it'll all be caulked in. So for the holes like that, what I use is DAP window glazing. It's a putty that they usually use to, you roll it out and you can sash windows with this as well. The older wooden windows with single pane glass. So you can reset on older windows with this stuff, but it works really well and holds in these holes better than lightweight spackle or caulking. And then what I go ahead and do is roll it up in a little ball, and you get a point, and you're just gonna force it into the hole, and you keep doing that over and over. You don't want that, what I just did, but that's because I'm working with one hand, and then you would take your knife and scrape it off smooth. But when you do that, you want to keep it pressed in with your left hand and then scrape off with the right, and then do that 2 or 3 times to make sure the hole is filled good and that it won't fall out, or sometimes it shrinks up and then you can still see where the nail was. But that's how I putty the holes in. And then for caulking, any type of paintable, flexible caulking, as long as it's paintable, will work for doing all the gaps from the trim to the wall, your corners, and that's it for the trim for caulking. So okay guys, you can see I got all the holes puttied and caulked in. I'm repainting this door jamb with the finished white, so I gotta prime it first. Went ahead and caulked all that. So that's the next step, is to paint this, and for that I am using sticks. Like, got a little paint on the front. This is a newer product that they came out with. It is a water-based, but it's supposed to bond to almost everything. And my friend, that they have a painting company, he recommended me to use this for a primer. So this is what I went ahead and got, because I thought I would have to use an oil-based primer. This is water-based, but he said anything can be used over top of this, and so does the can. So it says it has excellent adhesion and sealing. He said they switched to this primer, and he said that when you sand it after you prime, it doesn't come off very easily. So we'll see once we prime the wood and sand it, because you sand in between every coat for your trim, because you want to keep it smooth as glass, or as smooth as glass as you can. So we'll get this on there and take a look at it. So I went ahead and primed the door jamb, and I'm happy with this primer. It works really good. It smooths really, or sands down really smooth. So in between each coat, I put 2 coats on. I used 220 grit sandpaper just to knock it down and make it smooth. And I'm happy with this primer. It really does hold good. Because a lot of times when you sand, it'll take the edges off. And it didn't take the edges off, so passed the test. Really good primer, and that was the sticks. So I'm getting ready to paint this with the finish coat, which is the Impervo, the Benjamin Moore, which we showed you earlier. And when I do that, this is Penetrol. It's made by Flood. It's to help reduce brush and roller marks. So when you mix this in with the paint, it thins it down, and it allows the paint to lay out really nice and flat, and lets it glide a little bit easier when you're painting. It may require you to do an extra coat, so I'll probably have to coat this twice, but it gives you a nicer finished, almost a sprayed look. So this is a good thing to use. And if you were using a water-based trim paint, they make, same company, Flood makes a product, and that's called Flotrol, and that's for water-based paint to reduce your brush marks. So a little tip there on that, and I'm gonna go ahead and mix this stuff up and paint some door trim. Hey guys, we're back here with the room remodel, and the room is now done. I do have to do the radiator cover and mess with the door some yet, but as far as the walls, the trim, the floor, that is all sewed up and done. We got 2 coats on all the walls, 2 coats on the trim. Baseboard trim looks beautiful. It's really popping in here. Our lines all came out really good. I'm outside the room taping in, because the room is only 10 foot by 10, so it's hard to get a nice view from inside the room. So you can see the radiator got to get covered, and then I put in my outlet covers. We come around and we put the switch cover in. You got the trim, baseboard trim all the way around. There's the corner all cut in. So this is the accent wall. And you can see the sunlight really changes the color as we go along the wall, because of the eggshell is the finish and is reflecting some of the light back at us. So some spots the wall looks darker, other spots it looks lighter. And then going to the other side, we put in a solid doorstop, because I don't like the spring ones, and I do not want that to get slammed into the wall. And last thing to do will be the door, because it doesn't close. So I gotta rip that side down and it'll work out. So I hope you guys learned something from this, and you'll be able to apply it in your own place. It saves a lot of money when you can do these things yourself, and it's not harder. It's not really that hard. It just takes time and patience, and you know, it's only going to look as good as the effort you put into it. And to redo this room, which I said it's only was 10 foot by 10 foot, it ended up costing me $650 for all the wall paint, the trim paint, the primer, the floor, the actual trim itself. So I mean, it starts to add up, but it's a lot cheaper than paying a contractor to come in and do the work for you. And with me, I have some bad OCD, so I can't pay somebody to come in and do work, because I'm going to pick it apart. So that's why I do my own work. So I hope you learned something, and thanks for watching.